Welcome to your deep dive.
Hey.
Today we're cracking open Robert Sapolsky's Behave.
Oh, fantastic.
You've given me quite a stack of notes and articles on it.
A lot to unpack there.
It's going to be a wild ride through the science of why we do what we do.
Absolutely. And it's not just about understanding ourselves, though.
Right.
Sapolsky's book really pushes us to see how biology, psychology, and even culture are all intertwined.
Okay, so let's unpack that,
Okay.
if I'm understanding this right.
Yeah.
It's like saying we can't just blame a burst of anger on a single chemical in the brain.
Exactly. Sapolsky uses this analogy of disciplinary buckets. Imagine trying to explain something complex
Okay.
using only the tools from one bucket.
Yeah.
You're missing the whole picture.
So, sure, maybe someone's anger was related to a spike in a certain neurochemical.
Right.
But that spike was probably triggered by a hormone,
Right.
which was influenced by their childhood,
Exactly.
and maybe even by a gene they inherited.
You're getting it. It's layers upon layers like those Russian nesting dolls.
Okay.
You keep opening one to find another one inside.
And that's where things get really interesting.
Absolutely.
They've got all these layers interacting.
Yeah.
But Sapolsky dives deep into the brain itself.
Yeah.
He talks about the amygdala, right?
Yes.
This tiny part of the brain that's like our inner alarm system.
Yeah, the amygdala is fascinating because it gets information from our senses before the more thinking part of our brain, the cortex, has time to fully process it.
That's fast.
Think of it as a shortcut, but one that prioritizes speed over accuracy.
So it's like that time I nearly jumped out of my skin.
Right.
When I mistook a lamp cord for a snake.
Exactly.
My amygdala was screaming danger
Yeah.
before my brain had a chance to realize it was just a harmless cord.
Exactly. And to make things even more nuanced,
Okay.
the amygdala's response depends not just on the intensity of something like
Yeah.
pain, but also on whether it's predictable.
Unpredictable pain is worse for the amygdala than predictable pain.
Yes.
Why is that?
Think about it from an evolutionary perspective.
Okay.
Unpredictable threats are far more dangerous
Yeah.
because you can't prepare for them.
Right.
So the amygdala evolved to be extra sensitive to those kinds of situations.
Makes sense. It's like if you know a bee sting is coming,
Right.
it still hurts,
Yeah.
but it's not as startling or terrifying as being surprised by one.
Exactly.
Okay, so the amygdala is all about quick reactions.
Yes.
What about the part of the brain that's supposed to be more in control?
You're talking about the frontal cortex, right?
Yeah.
It's involved in planning,
Mhm.
decision-making,
Yeah.
and inhibiting those impulsive amygdala responses.
So it's like the adult in the room?
Yeah, you could say that.
Yeah.
But here's the catch.
Oh,
It's a real energy hog.
So you're saying even our willpower is limited by biology?
Yes, exactly.
I've definitely experienced that.
I think we all have.
Like after a long day of work,
Yep.
making even simple decisions
Yeah,
feels exhausting.
totally.
Is that my frontal cortex tapping out?
It could be.
Okay.
Sapolsky talks about this idea of cognitive load.
Okay.
Every decision we make,
Yeah.
every temptation we resist adds to this load.
Uh-huh.
Eventually,
Yeah.
the frontal cortex gets tired and our willpower weakens.
So it's like a muscle.
Kind of.
Yeah,
thing.
it gets fatigued.
You use it too much, it gets tired.
Interesting.
There's even research that shows this.
Really? What kind of research?
Well, there was this one study
Okay.
where they used a technique to temporarily silence
What?
a specific part of the frontal cortex.
You can silence a part of the brain.
You can temporarily.
Wow.
It's a mouthful, the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex.
The deal what now?
Yeah, it's a long one.
Okay, maybe let's just call it the decision-making center for simplicity.
Okay.
What happened when they silenced it?
The participants were more likely to accept unfair offers in an economic game. But here's the kicker. This only happened when they were playing against another human, not a computer.
So when their decision-making center was offline,
Right.
they were more likely to get ripped off,
Exactly.
but only by a real person.
That's what they found.
That's fascinating. What does that tell us?
It highlights how interconnected our brains are
Okay.
with our social environments.
Right.
Even something as seemingly abstract as fairness
Yeah.
is influenced by the interplay between our biology and our social interactions.
So our perceptions matter as much as the reality.
Yeah, very much so.
It's like our brains were wired to be both rational and emotional.
Absolutely.
And sometimes those two sides are in conflict.
Yeah, for sure.
Which reminds me of something else Sapolsky talks about.
Oh, yeah.
Dopamine.
Oh,
Everyone thinks it's the pleasure chemical,
right.
But it's actually much more complex than that.
It is.
So tell me more about dopamine.
Dopamine is less about the reward itself
Uh-huh.
and more about the anticipation. It's that feeling of wanting,
Right.
craving, seeking.
Uh-huh.
It's what keeps us motivated.
So it's not the happy ending.
Oh.
It's the journey.
It's the wanting.
The wanting.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
Think about delicious food.
Oh, yeah. Sometimes the anticipation of that first bite is even better than the actual eating.
Yeah.
So you're saying it's the anticipation that gets the dopamine flowing.
Exactly. And there's some amazing monkey studies that show this.
Really?
They release dopamine when they see the signal that a reward is coming.
Oh, wow.
Not just when they get the reward itself.
So it's the possibility of the reward, the chase, that really gets us going.
I think that's a great way to put it.
It makes sense.
Yeah.
From an evolutionary perspective,
Yeah.
you've got to be motivated to find food, shelter, and mates.
Absolutely. Keeps us going.
But sometimes our brains can lead us astray, right?
Unfortunately, yes.
Yeah, like with addiction.
That's one example, yeah.
That dopamine rush can be a dangerous thing.
It can be.
I'm curious to hear more about this.
Yeah, sure. But one of the most unsettling examples
Okay.
is the research on implicit bias.
Oh, wow.
Especially related to race.
Okay.
Even when people see faces of another race for just a split second, too fast to even register consciously,
Wow.
their amygdala can still activate.
Hold on. So even if I don't consciously realize I've seen a face, my brain might still be reacting to it.
That's what the research suggests.
That's a bit disturbing, isn't it?
It is. And remember,
Okay.
the amygdala is that super fast threat detecting part of the brain.
Mm-hmm.
So even though these exposures are subliminal, meaning you're not even aware of them,
Okay.
your brain is still making lightning fast judgments.
And what's even more concerning is that Sapolsky talks about the fusiform face area.
Right.
That part of the brain involved in facial recognition.
Yes.
Showing less activity for faces of another race.
Exactly.
And this is even in people who don't consider themselves racist.
Okay. Yeah.
It's like our brains are literally less attuned to recognizing and processing faces that are different from our own.
Yes, it's unsettling.
It raises important questions about how these biases
Yeah.
can be so deeply ingrained, even without our conscious awareness.
Absolutely. That's the challenge.
Wow. That's pretty heavy stuff.
It is.
Makes you wonder, are
Yeah.
we just hardwired for this us versus them thinking?
It's a fundamental question.
Is it part of our evolutionary legacy?
It certainly seems to be a fundamental aspect of human social cognition.
Okay, but this tendency to categorize people so quickly, it seems like that could lead to all sorts of problems. Where do we see this play out in the real world, aside from the obvious stuff like racism?
Well, think about the last time you felt instantly repelled by someone.
Okay.
Even before you knew anything about them. Maybe it was their clothes, their hairstyle, or even just a vibe they gave off.
You know, I actually had that experience just the other day at the grocery store. I saw this guy with a bunch of tattoos and piercings, and I instantly felt a bit uneasy.
Interesting.
And then I caught myself and thought, wait a minute, what's wrong with me?
That's the ISTM categorization at work. And what's really fascinating is the brain science behind it. The insula, a region associated with disgust, can actually be activated by people we perceive as them.
Wow.
It starts with concrete things like food or smells, but then generalizes to abstract concepts.
So first we're disgusted by what they eat, and then by what they believe.
That's the idea.
That's wild and a little depressing, if I'm honest.
It's definitely something to be aware of because
Yeah.
understanding how these unconscious biases work is the first step toward challenging and overcoming them.
Right. We can't just ignore them.
Exactly.
But that's a discussion for another time, perhaps.
We could do a whole deep dive on that.
Right. We've got a lot more to cover. But before we move on,
Yeah.
I want to ask you about this whole USTM thing in relation to hierarchy.
Okay.
Sapolsky talks about how hierarchies are everywhere in the animal kingdom.
They are.
But they take on a unique form in humans.
Right. We sometimes choose our leaders.
Right.
And they're supposed to work for the common good.
Okay.
This adds a layer of moral and social complexity that we don't see in other animals.
And even the biological effects of rank are different, right?
They are.
Like in baboons, if you're low ranking, you've got all this stress.
Yeah.
But in humans, it's not always so clear cut.
Exactly. It's not just about your position in the hierarchy, but also about your personality and your perception of that position.
That makes sense.
Sapolsky talks about these studies on social dominance orientation.
Okay.
Basically, how much people value power and status.
So are you saying some people are just hardwired to crave power?
Well, the research suggests that people who score high on this social dominance scale actually have a less activation in brain regions associated with empathy.
So the more they want power, the less they care about others.
That's what the research suggests, yes.
That's pretty disturbing.
It is, and it highlights one of the many paradoxes of human nature.
We are complicated creatures.
We are complex, yes.
We can be incredibly cooperative and altruistic.
Absolutely.
But we can also be ruthless and power-hungry.
Strange mix.
It's like we've got these angels and demons battling it out inside our skulls.
What constant struggle.
Which brings us to another big question. How much of our morality is hardwired versus learned?
A big question indeed.
Sapolsky brings up the classic trolley problem.
Oh, yeah.
You know, the one where you have to choose between letting 5 people die or pushing one person onto the tracks to save them.
It's a classic thought experiment.
Yeah.
It really gets to the heart of our moral intuitions.
Right. It's a tough one.
Most people struggle with it.
Yeah.
Which shows the tension between deontological ethics,
Okay.
where actions are judged as right or wrong based on rules, and utilitarian ethics, which are more focused on outcomes.
So, like, is it always wrong to kill, even if it saves more lives?
That's the kind of dilemma the trolley problem forces us to confront.
Yeah, and there's no easy answer.
Not at all. And what's even more interesting is that our responses can change dramatically depending on how the dilemma is framed.
Oh, wow.
For example, people are more likely to push the person if they're described as a villain.
So even our deepest moral judgments can be swayed by our biases and emotions.
Exactly.
Wow. Okay. That's a lot to chew on. I'm already feeling like I need a break.
Yeah.
And we've only just scratched the surface.
Just getting started.
But before we dive into part 2,
okay,
is there anything else you think is crucial for our listeners to understand about the foundations of human behavior?
I think the key takeaway so far is that it's all about context.
Context.
The same brain region, the same hormone, even the same gene can lead to completely different behaviors. Depending on the situation.
The individual and their environment.
Well, it's not just about what's happening inside our bodies, but also about the world around us, our relationships, our experiences, and even our culture.
All of it.
We are truly products of both nature and nurture.
A complex mix.
And that complexity, that constant interplay between all these factors is what makes studying human behavior so fascinating and so challenging.
Absolutely.
Well, on that note,
okay,
let's take a deep breath and get ready to delve even deeper
just go ahead
into this incredible world of human behavior in part 2.
I'm looking forward to it. Welcome back. We've been exploring the intricate workings of the human brain.
Yeah, all those neurons and hormones.
But to truly understand why we behave the way we do, we need to zoom out and consider the grand tapestry of human evolution.
Okay, so we're going from neurons and hormones to the dawn of humankind.
That's right.
Quite the leap. What can the study of our ancestors
tell us about our modern-day behaviors?
You might be surprised by how much our evolutionary past shapes our present. Sapolsky argues that understanding the challenges our ancestors face can provide crucial insights into the roots of many human behaviors.
So we're talking survival of the fittest.
Right.
But in a broader sense than just brute strength.
Exactly. In evolutionary terms, fitness is all about reproductive success.
Okay.
How good you are at passing on your genes. Think about it. The behaviors that helped our ancestors survive and reproduce are the ones most likely to be ingrained in us today.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
But I have to admit, when I think about our evolutionary past, I sometimes picture a pretty brutal world.
Yeah.
Is it all about competition and aggression?
Well, it certainly wasn't a walk in the park.
Right.
Sapolsky discusses some pretty dark examples of behaviors that, while disturbing to us now, might have been advantageous for survival back then.
Like what?
Take competitive infanticide, for instance.
Infanticide? You mean killing infants?
Yeah.
That's horrific.
It is. And thankfully, it's not common in humans today.
Okay.
But in some primate species, a new male who takes over a group might kill the infants that aren't his own.
That seems incredibly cruel, but I guess from a purely evolutionary perspective, I can see how it would benefit the male's genes.
Exactly.
But wouldn't that behavior also risk alienating potential mates?
That's a good point. And it highlights how complex these evolutionary pressures can be.
Okay.
In many species, there are counterbalancing forces at play.
So give me an example.
For example, females might band together to protect their young.
Right.
Or they might choose males who show signs of being good protectors.
So it's like a balance of power.
It's a constant arms race between competing strategies.
So even though humans don't typically engage in infanticide, are you saying there are any echoes of this behavior in our modern world?
Sapolsky brings up the Cinderella effect. The observation that stepchildren are statistically more likely to be abused or killed by a step-parent than by a biological parent. Yeah, it's a controversial topic.
Right, I can imagine.
And there are other explanations for this phenomenon.
Okay.
But it does raise some interesting questions about evolutionary psychology.
You're saying that even though we've evolved beyond those brutal behaviors, there might still be some lingering subconscious biases.
That's the idea.
That's a tough one to think about.
It's not about saying step-parents are bad people.
Okay.
But rather acknowledging that the evolutionary pressures that shaped our brains might still influence our behavior in subtle ways.
That's a good distinction.
Yeah.
Okay, so competitive infanticide is one example.
Right.
But are there any positive takeaways from this evolutionary perspective?
Absolutely. One of the most significant is kin selection.
Kin selection.
The idea that we're more likely to help those who are genetically related to us.
Oh, okay.
Think about it. Helping your relatives increases the chances that your shared genes will be passed on to future generations.
That makes intuitive sense.
Right.
We see it all the time in families.
Yeah.
People going above and beyond for their siblings, parents, and children.
Exactly. And there's evidence for kin selection throughout the animal kingdom.
Really?
Animals are more likely to share food, protect each other, and even sacrifice themselves for close relatives.
Okay, so kin selection explains why we help our family.
Right.
But what about all the cooperation we see between unrelated individuals?
That's where reciprocal altruism comes in.
Reciprocal altruism.
It's the idea that we help others with the expectation that they'll help us in return.
It's like that saying, you scratch my back, I'll scratch yours.
Exactly. But what's fascinating is that reciprocal altruism can be a surprisingly effective strategy, even when there's a risk of someone cheating the system.
Yeah, because then you're out of luck.
Sapolsky talks about this game theory model called the prisoner's dilemma.
Wait, the prisoner's dilemma?
Yeah.
I remember learning about that in college.
It's a classic.
Isn't it about two criminals who have to decide whether to betray each other or stay silent?
That's right. And what's fascinating about the prisoner's dilemma is that it illustrates how cooperation can emerge.
Right.
Even in situations where it seems like it's in everyone's best interest to act selfishly.
So it's kind of counterintuitive.
It is, yeah.
Interesting.
One of the most effective strategies in this game is called tit for tat.
Okay, remind me how tit for tat works again. I remember it being surprisingly simple.
You start by cooperating.
Okay.
And then you simply mirror your opponent's last move.
Okay.
If they cooperate, you cooperate. If they betray you, you betray them on the next round.
So you're basically rewarding cooperation and punishing betrayal.
Exactly.
But why is that so effective? I feel like there must be more to it.
Think about a real-world example.
Okay.
Imagine you're working on a group project. If you start by assuming everyone will contribute fairly, and then you adjust your effort based on what others are doing, you're more likely to end up with a good outcome.
Yeah, I can see that.
If someone slacks off,
right,
you can reduce your effort to match theirs.
And they get the message.
But if everyone pulls their weight,
right,
you'll all benefit from the shared success.
That's a great example. So tit for tat is basically a model for building trust and encouraging fairness in social interactions.
Exactly.
It's a strategy for promoting cooperation on a larger scale.
I like that, yeah.
And research has shown that in repeated interactions, tit for tat outperforms more aggressive or consistently selfish strategies.
That's what they found, yeah.
It's a reminder that cooperation can be a powerful force in human evolution.
For sure.
This is also fascinating. So we've got kin selection for helping family.
Yes.
And reciprocal altruism for cooperating with non-relatives. Is that the whole story of cooperation in the evolutionary picture?
You're forgetting one crucial piece: group selection.
Oh, right. Group selection.
It's the idea that groups that cooperate effectively are more likely to survive and thrive than groups that are internally divided and selfish.
So it's like survival of the fittest, but on a group level.
Exactly. Imagine two tribes competing for resources. The tribe that can work together,
Yeah.
share food, and defend each other
Right.
will have a significant advantage
Yeah, that makes sense.
over the tribe that's constantly fighting amongst themselves.
It's like, if you want to survive as a group, you better learn to play nice.
Exactly.
But I remember hearing that group selection has been a controversial idea in evolutionary biology.
It has, and for good reason.
Okay, why is that?
In the past, group selection was often used as a sort of magic wand explanation for altruistic behavior, without a clear understanding of the underlying mechanisms. But in recent years, there's been a resurgence of interest in group selection, especially in the form of multi-level selection.
Multi-level selection.
This approach recognizes that selection can operate at multiple levels, from genes to individuals to groups.
So it's not just about individuals competing against each other.
Right.
But also about groups competing against other groups.
Precisely. And this competition between groups can actually drive the evolution of cooperative behavior within groups.
Oh, that's interesting.
Think of it like a team sport.
Okay,
the team that works together most effectively is more likely to win.
Yeah.
Even if some individual players might be tempted to hog the ball or slack off on defense.
It's like the whole is greater than the sum of its parts.
Yeah, good way to put it.
It's amazing to think about how these different levels of selection have shaped human behavior over millions of years.
Yeah, it's a long process.
So our capacity for cooperation, both with family and non-kin, is a key part of what makes us human.
That's what the evidence suggests. Of course, it's not all sunshine and rainbows. Our evolutionary history has also equipped us with some tendencies that can be pretty destructive, especially when amplified by our modern social structures and technologies.
That's a sobering thought.
Yeah.
We've evolved to be incredibly cooperative, but we've also inherited some baggage from our past.
It's a mixed bag for sure.
I'm really curious to hear more about these destructive tendencies.
Okay, but before we dive into that, I think it's important to emphasize that understanding our evolutionary past isn't about excusing bad behavior. It's about gaining a deeper understanding of the forces that have shaped us. Both for better and for worse.
That's a good point. Knowledge is power, right?
Exactly.
The more we understand about ourselves, the better equipped we are to make better choices.
Couldn't agree more.
And speaking of choices, that brings us to another fascinating aspect of human behavior. Our complex relationship with authority.
Right, a big one.
Sapolsky delves into some pretty disturbing research on obedience. Especially in the context of atrocities like the Holocaust and the My Lai massacre.
Those are tough to think about.
Those events are incredibly disturbing.
They are.
And it's hard to fathom how people could commit such horrific acts.
I agree.
How does Sapolsky even begin to explain something like that?
He points to the research of Stanley Milgram, who conducted those famous experiments on obedience in the 1960s.
Oh, yeah.
You know, the ones where participants were told to administer electric shocks to another person? Even when the person was screaming in pain.
Oh, yeah. Those experiments are pretty infamous.
Yeah.
I remember learning about them in psychology class and feeling pretty disturbed by the results.
Yeah, they're tough.
Didn't a surprisingly high percentage of people obey the experimenter's orders?
Right.
Even when they thought they were causing serious harm.
That's right. And those findings have sparked a lot of debate about the nature of human obedience and the power of authority.
Right? It's like, how could they do that?
Of course, it's important to remember that those experiments were conducted in a very specific context. And there are many factors that can influence obedience in real-world situations.
So it's not a perfect analogy.
Not exactly, no. But the results are still incredibly thought-provoking.
They really are. I mean, it makes you wonder, if you were in that situation, would you have the courage to disobey?
It's a tough question.
Or would you just go along with it
right,
because someone in a position of authority told you to?
That's what's so unsettling about those findings.
It's like we're all capable of doing terrible things under the right circumstances.
It's a scary thought.
And it's not just about those extreme situations like the Holocaust.
Right.
Obedience to authority plays out in our everyday lives.
It does.
In our interactions with bosses, teachers, police officers, and even our own families.
It's everywhere.
You know, that reminds me of a time when welcome back to the final part of our deep dive into Behave.
It's been quite a journey.
It has. You know, as we've been talking about all these different aspects of human behavior, It's really striking how complex it all is.
It is.
We've got genes and hormones and evolution and culture all swirling around, shaping who we are and how we interact with the world.
It's like trying to solve a giant puzzle where each piece keeps changing shape right before your eyes.
That's a good way to put it.
But one of the most fascinating pieces of this puzzle, and one that Sapolsky spends a lot of time exploring, is the question of morality.
Morality.
What makes us judge something as right or wrong?
Yet morality feels like one of those things that's deeply human.
It does.
It's what allows us to form societies, cooperate in large groups, and create systems of justice.
Absolutely. But as we've seen, our moral compasses aren't always pointing in the same direction.
Right. Everyone's got their own sense of what's right and wrong.
Exactly. And that's where things get really interesting. Sapolsky dives into this tension between our moral intuitions, those gut feelings about right and wrong, and our capacity for moral reasoning, where we try to think things through more logically.
So it's like our heart versus our head?
Yeah, kind of.
It's like that classic trolley problem we talked about earlier.
Oh, yeah, the trolley problem.
So you sacrifice one person to save 5. It feels impossible to make a purely rational decision in that scenario.
Right, because your emotions are going haywire.
Exactly.
And that's what the trolley problem highlights so brilliantly.
Okay.
Our moral judgments are often a messy blend of emotions, instincts, and logical calculations.
It's not always black and white.
Not all. And plus, even subtle changes in how a moral dilemma is presented can dramatically shift our responses.
Oh, wow. So it's not even about the situation itself.
It's about how we perceive it.
It's like our brains are trying to weigh all these different factors, the potential harm, the intent behind the actions, and even our own personal biases.
Exactly. It's complicated.
And it's no wonder we don't always agree on what the right thing to do is.
I agree.
And then there's the added complexity of sacred values.
Right, sacred values.
Those moral beliefs that are so deeply held, they feel almost untouchable.
Core to our being.
You know, it's funny you mention that, because I was just thinking about some of the heated discussions I've had with friends and family about things like religion and politics.
Right.
It's like we can't even have a civil conversation because these topics are so emotionally charged.
It's because these issues often tap into our core sense of identity and belonging.
Right. It's not just about ideas. It's about who we are.
When our sacred values are challenged, it feels like a personal attack.
It does.
And it triggers a powerful defensive response.
So if our moral beliefs are so deeply intertwined with our emotions and identities, how can we ever hope to bridge these divides?
Right. It's a challenge.
Are we doomed to perpetual conflict?
I wouldn't say doomed, but it's definitely a challenge. Sapolsky talks about the reconciliation process in South Africa after the end of apartheid.
Right, a really complex situation.
And it offers some valuable lessons.
Okay.
Nelson Mandela understood that true reconciliation wouldn't come from simply ignoring or dismissing the deeply held beliefs of the Afrikaner minority.
They had to be part of the conversation.
Exactly. He recognized that finding common ground, even on deeply divisive issues, requires empathy, understanding, and a willingness to see the world through the other side's eyes.
So even if we can't agree on everything, we can at least try to see where each other is coming from?
I think that's a good starting point.
Maybe that's the first step toward building a more compassionate and less polarized world.
It's a good goal.
But speaking of challenging ideas, we can't wrap up this deep dive without tackling one of the biggest questions of all.
Which is?
Free will.
Ah, yes, free will.
Do we really have control over our actions? Or are we just puppets dancing to the strings of our biology and our environment?
It's a question that has plagued philosophers for centuries.
Okay, now we're getting into some seriously deep philosophical waters. I've always wondered about this.
Yeah, me too.
On the one hand, it feels like I'm making my own choices.
Right.
But on the other hand, when you start thinking about all the factors that influence our behavior.
Right, all those things we've been talking about.
Our genes, our upbringing, our hormones, even the bacteria in our gut.
The gut microbiome.
It makes you wonder how much agency we really have.
It's a puzzle.
So what's the verdict? Are we truly in control?
Yeah.
Or are we just biological robots running on pre-programmed software?
Well, as you might imagine, it's not a simple yes or no answer.
Right, because nothing with humans is ever simple.
Exactly. There's evidence from brain imaging studies that suggests our brains might be making decisions before we're even consciously aware of them.
Hold on, my brain is making decisions before I even know it.
That's what some of the research suggests.
It's kind of creepy, to be honest.
I know it's a bit mind-bending, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah.
But it doesn't necessarily mean we're just mindless automatons.
Okay, so there's hope.
Some neuroscientists have proposed the idea of free won't.
Free won't?
The ability to consciously veto or inhibit actions that our brains might have initiated unconsciously.
So it's like our conscious mind is the final arbiter.
Yeah, good analogy.
Able to step in and say, nope, not doing that.
Right.
Even if our subconscious has already set the wheels in motion.
Exactly.
Okay, that's a bit reassuring.
Yeah.
But it still raises all sorts of questions about morality and responsibility.
Big questions.
If we're not fully in control of our actions. How can we hold people accountable for their behavior?
That's a huge question.
Yeah.
And one that societies have been grappling with for centuries.
Right. It's a fundamental question of justice.
Sapolsky argues that even if we acknowledge the limitations of free will, we still need a legal system that protects society and holds individuals responsible for their actions.
So it's like we might not have complete free will in a philosophical sense.
Yeah.
But we still have to live as if we do.
In a way, yes.
Okay.
The alternative, a society where people aren't held accountable for their actions is not a world most of us would want to live in.
I can see that.
Yeah.
It would be pure chaos.
Yeah.
But it still feels like a bit of a paradox.
It is.
How can we be both products of our biology and our environment and yet still be responsible for our choices?
It's a question that has puzzled philosophers and scientists for ages.
Wait, there's no easy answer.
There's no easy answer. But I think what's important is that we keep asking these questions. Keep exploring the complexities of human nature. And keep searching for ways to create a more just, compassionate, and flourishing world.
Well said. It's definitely been a mind-expanding journey.
It has.
We've explored the inner workings of the brain.
Yeah.
Delved into our evolutionary past.
Millions of years.
Confronted the darker sides of human nature.
The good and the bad.
And even grappled with the enigma of free will.
One of the big ones.
And through it all, we've seen how biology, psychology, culture, and experience intertwine to create the tapestry of human behavior.
All those threads coming together.
It's messy.
It is.
It's complex.
Definitely.
And it's constantly evolving.
Well, always changing.
But it's also incredibly fascinating.
It is.
And understanding it is essential if we want to build a better future.
I think that's a great point.
So the biggest takeaway for me is this.
Okay.
We're not just robots running on autopilot.
No, we have choices.
Our brains are plastic. Our values can shift, and even deeply ingrained biases can be challenged.
We can change.
That means we have the power to change, to grow, and to create a world that reflects the best of what it means to be human.
It's inspiring.
And that's a pretty amazing thought, don't you think?
I couldn't agree more. It's a powerful reminder
Yeah.
that we're all works in progress, constantly learning, adapting, and evolving.
Yeah. And who knows what the future holds.
And that's what makes the study of human behavior so endlessly fascinating.
Well, thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
It's been my pleasure.
We hope it sparked some curiosity and inspired you to keep exploring the incredible world of human behavior.
It's a wild ride.
Until next time, keep learning.
Keep learning.
Keep questioning.
Keep those questions coming.
And keep striving to be the best version of yourself.
I like that. Well said.